Can you hear me okay? When I was 14 years old, I tried to take my life. And by some miracle, my mom found me in time, and I survived. I'm going to talk to you today about the youth mental health crisis. And I'm going to speak for about 30 minutes, and by the time I'm done speaking, about 40 people will have died by suicide around the world. That's about a school bus of people. Can you imagine the international news coverage of a school bus of people dying every 30 minutes? But we don't have that kind of coverage because it's people with mental illness. So you're probably wondering who Gen Z is. So Gen Z is the generation born between 1997 and 2012. And we basically came out of the womb accessing the internet. We grew up on Facebook, survived a global pandemic before we could legally drink, and we learned how to do active shooter drills before we learned how to do our taxes, which we still don't know how to do, by the way. We're more diverse, more progressive, and more outspoken than any generation before us. But depending on the data you examine, between 40 and 50% of my generation carries a mental health diagnosis. Most of us feel disconnected, isolated, and alone. These numbers are the highest of any generation ever. And half of those suffering never receive treatment, not because we don't want it, but because we cannot access it or afford it. And what upsets me is that most experts and most older adults, we continue to blame social media as the sole reason why my generation is so screwed up. But I'm going to explain over the next 30 minutes why it's a lot more complicated than you think. So I want you to raise your hand if you know someone with a mental health diagnosis or disorder. I want you to stand up if you know someone in your circle or maybe close to you that's died by suicide. I need you all to take a look at each other because that's a lot of people. Thank you. You can sit down. So I've been researching mental health for a long time, and I know I look kind of young, but I've been studying mental health since I was a teenager. And during my research, I started receiving messages from around the world through social media from young people from rural Montana to Mumbai. And while the words were different, the pain and experiences were the same. People said things to me like, I feel like I'm drowning. Nothing feels real anymore. I don't know why I'm here. Suicide is the 4th leading cause of death globally for teens and young adults. Suicide is the 2nd leading cause of death in America for ages 10 to 24. And depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide. So as you can imagine, it's quite a public health issue. And it's pretty expensive. Depression costs the global economy roughly $1 trillion a year. $1 trillion. So I have this picture of the map here of our whole world. And I would love for you guys to call out which countries you think have the highest rates of depression. Yeah. USA? Korea? Japan? Okay. So here's a map from the World Population Review. And obviously these numbers are higher in younger people, but this is a general overview of our populations as a whole. Does anything surprise you? I point this out because mental health and our intuitions about mental illness, our perceptions often tend to be inaccurate. And so here's some of the basic things we need for good mental health. These things include community, financial security, belonging, nutrition, affordable housing, clean air, freedom to express sexuality, sufficient sleep, safe water, affordable healthcare, and safety. How many people do we know that have all of these, especially in our modern world? And so I'm talking to you today about some of the factors that have contributed to this crisis, and I write about all of them in my book, which I do have here today. But I'm going to just talk about what have clearly emerged from the data that I can speak about in 30 minutes. And these include economics, isolation, environment, and meaning. So starting with economics, has anyone heard of the Human Development Index before? So it's the United Nations measure of how well a country meets health, education, and economic opportunity. And what I did is I took global data and I analyzed it, looking at depression rates. And what I found was that when there were low human development levels, there were higher rates of depression. And so that's probably what you would expect, but what that means is that mental illness is intimately connected to the structural conditions in which we live. And so I also looked at unemployment data, and I found that when I looked at 166 countries, I used a linear regression and found that unemployment significantly predicted national depression rates. And so in human terms, that means that for every percentage point increase in unemployment, we see measurable population level depression. The CDC has also found that youth in lower income families are twice as likely to suffer from depression or anxiety. And the National Longitudinal Study on Adolescent and Adult Health found that over 20,000 teenagers who experienced financial hardship in adolescence had higher rates of suicidality a decade later, even after controlling for prior health status. But what's more troubling is that during the 2008 housing crash, there was a significant increase in suicide rates in both the US and Europe. And we witnessed more than 10,000 deaths during that year, which was largely linked to unemployment and financial hardship. But you're probably wondering, why is Gen Z different? What makes us a different generation? So Gen Z, for starters, we grew up with a significantly higher percent of individuals who had single-parent households. Approximately 23% of US children under 18 live with one parent and no other adults, which is higher in the US than any other country. So we also grew up during one of the worst economic recessions since the Great Depression. At the height of the Great Recession during 2011 and 2012, most Gen Z were still children, but nearly 1 in 4 of us lived in poverty. That's higher than the childhood poverty rates experienced by millennials, Gen X, or boomers at similar ages. And it didn't stop there. In 2012, almost a half of American Gen Z were living in low-income households. And what also makes us different is that college has gone up, the cost has gone up by about 400% in comparison to our parents. And the cost of healthcare has gone up by 380%. And the cost of housing has gone up, it's skyrocketed. And so for the first time ever, our generation, we are not living as good as our parents did. And what is awful is that globally, mental health accounts for 13% of disease burden, but receives less than 2% of health budgets. So it makes me wonder, at least, if maybe depression is a rational response to an irrational system. So the next pillar I will talk about is isolation. Economics does not tell the full story, and depending on the data you look at, between 50 to 80% of Gen Z reports feeling persistently lonely. And I can tell you in my own life, when I was about 8 years old, I was in a horrible skiing accident and broke half my face. And that wasn't what hurt me. When I took 2 weeks out of school, I came back and I had this friend group since preschool. And because I had taken so much time away, I was suddenly forgotten. And this group of people I had known, suddenly I was no longer cool to them. And so at a young age, I experienced pretty severe isolation. And it really showed me how important it is to find connection and belonging, and that having belonging is so inherently important to our well-being. The UK appointed a minister of loneliness in 2018, and Japan followed in 2021. And this shows us that this is happening around the world, that loneliness is an epidemic that is requiring cabinet-level intervention. And we really are truly lonely as a generation. A study in MedRx found that chronic loneliness increases depression risk by 40%, and it is deadlier than smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, and has worse long-term health impacts than obesity. And there's a science behind it too. Chronic loneliness doesn't just hurt us emotionally, it actually physically hurts our brains. It increases cortisol, dysregulates our sleep, it weakens our immunity, and it alters how we perceive threats. And so our brains begin to expect rejection more and more and interpret neutral interactions as hostile. And it's not happening in a vacuum, because around the world we are closing community centers, we are underfunding our parks, we are isolating our older adults, and instead of designing our cities around connection, we are designing them around cars and convenience, which is just breeding disconnection. Which leads me to environment. So I've got two children here, child A and child B. Child A, let's imagine they both grew up in the same city, same time, but child A grew up surrounded by green spaces and parks and had tons of access to walkability. Child A grew up in a concrete jungle where she had no green spaces, no parks, no walkability. I want you to guess which child grew up with less likelihood of developing a psychiatric disorder. Less likely to develop a psychiatric disorder? Yes. Okay, so if we were wanting to talk about who's more likely to develop a psychiatric disorder, it is child B by 55%, which is honestly a very startling number to think about, that our environments have such a deep impact on the way we grow up and our mental health. When we spend time in nature, our cortisol levels drop, our rumination decreases, and our mood genuinely improves. Even passive exposure, like seeing greenery through a window, leads to better emotional regulation and faster recovery from mental fatigue. But the problem is we've designed a world that cuts us off from this basic human need. I looked at air pollution in terms of depression levels, and what I found was that there was a significant association between air pollution and depression rates across countries. And so countries with higher levels of air pollution tended to report higher depression rates. And a meta-analysis also found that there's a 19% increase in the risk of depression for every 10 micrograms per cubic meter in increase of pollution, specifically PM 2.5. And it's not just pollution. Childhood exposure to lead, mercury, endocrine disrupting chemicals is associated with cognitive impairment and higher rates of ADHD, mood disorders, and behavioral issues. Chronic noise pollution from highways and airports raises stress hormones, worsens sleep, and contributes to long-term anxiety. But perhaps what's most insidious is how we've built our communities. We've created neighborhoods designed around cars rather than people, and the psychological cost is enormous. Walkable neighborhoods promote physical activity, social interaction, and a sense of well-being, which are all really protective factors for health outcomes. Think about it. When we design spaces where we can't walk, we don't just lose mobility, we lose connection. Suburbs leave people, especially youth, our oldest people, and those with disabilities, socially and physically cut off from our communities. And it's worth noting that climate anxiety now affects 75% of young people. And we're asking kids to inherit a planet that older generations have broken, and we're wondering why we feel hopeless. We need policy, urban planning, and environmental justice that treat mental health not just as an individual issue, but as a design issue. And so now I'm going to talk to you about meaning. So there's this quote, "Those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how." And that insight from Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist Viktor Frankl sits at the heart of what I believe is one of the most overlooked public health challenges of our time, which is a crisis of meaning, particularly among young people. We talk about depression, anxiety, and suicide like they are individual pathologies, but what if these are symptoms of something deeper, something existential and preventable? Gen Z is now the most depressed generation on record and is facing more than just stress. We are facing a collapse in systems that have traditionally helped us answer the question, why am I here? And research across disciplines confirms that meaning is not just nice to have, it is biologically protective. A large-scale meta-analysis found that higher life purpose is associated with reduced mortality, even after adjusting for socioeconomic status and baseline health. Meaning is linked to lower cortisol, reduced systemic inflammation, better cardiovascular profiles, and even delayed onset of cognitive decline. Meaning functions like an internal compass that stabilizes us through uncertainty and buffers against chronic stressors we try so hard to manage downstream. The problem is today, Gen Z is coming of age in a landscape that actively erodes meaning. Religious affiliation is at an all-time low among youth. Stable career pathways and economic optimism have declined, with many young adults expecting lower lifetime earnings than their parents. And digital culture has fragmented identity formation, pushing teens into constant comparison, self-curation, and performance-driven validation. And so there's a study in Nature Communications that found that increased time on social media was directly correlated to lower perceived purpose in life, especially among adolescents. So we've improved access to crisis services, but we've largely ignored the upstream causes of despair, the systemic stripping away of meaning. And this is a preventative challenge because meaning isn't just existential, but it's also ecological. It's shaped by whether young people feel seen and needed in their communities, whether our cities offer third spaces for identity exploration and social bonding, and whether our digital platforms reinforce purposeful engagement or algorithmic nihilism. So why does this crisis continue despite increased awareness? And what the heck are we going to do to fix it? I believe it's because we're continuing to try to treat mental health at an individual level while ignoring the systems that are making people sick. We medicate children but tell them to go home to unstable housing. We teach resilience while ignoring that it's burnout that needs fixing. We call it a youth problem when it's a society problem. In my hometown, for example, we built a $50 million state-of-the-art psychiatric hospital. But the problem is that the wait time is about 8 weeks. They charge $20 a day for parking. And it looks so great in a press release, but it doesn't actually serve the populations that need them the most. And that is why I'm so grateful to be here at a public health conference where we're talking about prevention. Because I really do believe true prevention isn't just about earlier intervention. It's about transforming the conditions that make people unwell in the first place. What this looks like is universal basic health care, with mental health integrated into primary care, not just as an afterthought, but as a standard practice. Study after study shows that meeting people's basic needs improves mental health outcomes. Trauma-informed schools with fewer police officers and more counselors, mentors, and therapists. We know that access to care and reduced stigma improve mental illness rates. Green spaces within walking distance of every child's home. Nature is a proven antidepressant, and environmental access is a public health necessity. Economic safety nets like universal basic income that reduce chronic stress and give young people a sense of agency over our futures. And the last one is community-based programs rooted in a simple truth that the opposite of depression, addiction, anxiety is connection. The most preventative thing we can do is create a world where people feel like they belong. Everyone in this room, we have the power to build something different. We have the data, we have the science. What we need is the imagination and the courage to act on what we know. Let us redefine prevention as a bold political act. Let us stop pathologizing and start transforming the world around us. Because young people are not broken. They are responding normally to a society that is. To every policymaker, researcher, and health professional here, let's be the people that didn't look away. Let's build a world where public health is not a privilege, but a right. Because the cost of waiting is measured in funerals. This is a picture of my best friend and I at graduation at high school. Just a few years after taking this photo, she made the permanent decision to end her life. Every day, I miss her. And every day, I wish our systems hadn't failed her. I wish the help she received had been enough, but it wasn't. And just like her, millions of people will face this same choice every year. Many will not survive, devastating the communities around them. In fact, for every suicide, it's said that 114 people are impacted. And I'm done with funerals, and if you can see, I'm devastated. It's because I am, and you should be too. If I leave you with anything today, it's this. Keep fighting for the work that you're doing. As I've shown you, it's all interconnected and intersectional, and it all matters. Do not give up on your research, your advocacy, your hope. The work happening at conferences like this can and will save lives. Now more than ever, we need your work. And if you know someone who's struggling with mental illness, I ask you to be kind. And what I mean by that is the act of making someone feel less alone, to make them feel seen and valued, like they belong. And why kindness? Well, research shows that kindness lowers cortisol, boosts serotonin and oxytocin, and strengthens immune function and creates real measurable resilience. And in a world where loneliness, exclusion, and microaggressions are pushing people to the edge, kindness is a radical intervention. It costs nothing, but it can save a life. The most impactful prevention strategy might not be a tool or a treatment, but it might be how we treat each other. Because long before a crisis ever begins, people are asking themselves, do I matter? Do I belong? Why am I here? And I want all of us in this room to make sure that the answer every time is yes, you belong here. And so I wanted to hold everyone accountable in this room because oftentimes we hear these things, but we don't actually do them. And so all of you, I want you to go home today and I want you to do something kind, and then I want you to tell me about it. So I put my email here. I would love for you to all take a picture of it or write it down, allieskindness@gmail.com. And I want you to tell me the kind thing you did, because it's not just for you, but it's also for the world, and it really does make an impact. At the beginning of this talk, I told you I tried to take my life, but I didn't tell you why. And the short answer is that I was severely bullied. And day after day, I had the same thought over and over, that I didn't belong. And I really thought that no one cared about me. And now, at almost 30, I can look at all of you here and say, I'm so grateful I'm here. And so that's why I started my nonprofit, The Belonging Lab, because I wanted to turn my pain into power. And so I challenge all of you here to think about what is your pain and what power can you turn that into. And so you can shape whatever it is that you're passionate about into some form of justice. And I would love to collaborate with all of you. So please do reach out. Thank you.